So breaking right now, President Trump is on the cusp of an apparent Supreme Court victory, with justices signaling they may allow him to fire a member of the Federal Trade Commission without cause.
I guess what I don't understand from your overarching argument is why that determination of Congress, which makes perfect sense given its duty to protect the people of the United States, why that is subjugated to a concern about the president not being able to control everything. But one would think, under our constitutional design, given the history of the monarchy and the concerns that the framers had about a president controlling everything, that in the clash between those two, Congress's view that we should be able to have independence with respect to certain issues should take precedence.
So good old Ketanji Brown Jackson decided to throw a complete temper tantrum in the Supreme Court today, basically arguing that, well, I feel a certain way, therefore it should be the federal law. Although in fairness, this is basically what she always argues in the court. Highly qualified person, by the way, definitely not a DEI hire in any respect. But amidst the backdrop of all of this is the fact that the Trump administration is poised to win a major legal victory in the Supreme Court when it comes to the use of executive power, specifically pertaining to the DOJ efforts, firing government bureaucrats, being able to oversee agencies, and ultimately draining the swamp. And so I do want to bring you the full details of this upcoming FTC ruling today that does appear, based on what the conservative justices are saying, that it is trending in a certain direction. And of course, the precedent it could set, right? What it could potentially mean going forward for many of the other things Trump is trying to do, because this is, of course, a repeated theme we keep on seeing. The woke activist judges, the lower courts, try to stay, put injunctions, stop everything that Trump is doing. The Supreme Court ultimately has to come bail us out. But this could potentially, again, be a little bit bigger than just the FTC. So we'll tell you about it. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. That's the best way to support our work. It also ensures that you can stay up to date with all of the latest news and coverage. And that said, to give you the full context here of what is happening, essentially earlier this year, President Trump made the executive decision to fire FTC Commissioner Rebecca Slaughter. This is someone who obviously sits on the board of the Federal Trade Commission. Apparently, Trump appointed her back in 2018. Biden renewed her appointment, and then later now Trump wants to fire her for whatever reason. Although, I mean, to be completely fair about this, it shouldn't necessarily matter, because after all, the FTC and all of these government agencies are ultimately a part of the executive branch, as I've long tried to argue throughout the DOJ efforts, right? If the president of the United States is the chief executive of that branch of the government, then why would he not have the ability to oversee and regulate his own part of government, right? When it comes, for instance, to staffing or choosing who he wants to put to head agencies or fire even the bureaucrats within those agencies. Your boss is the president, right? Imagine working in a scenario where the boss is unable to fire you or even tell you what to do. Well, that is exactly, of course, the situation that we have had, because later on, a court basically stepped in and said, no, you can't fire the FTC chair. The president doesn't have that power. And this is currently, of course, the debate right now going on in front of the Supreme Court. Take a listen.
First on Fox Business, Lydia Hu has gotten reaction from the FTC chair. Lydia.
Hi there, Liz. That's right. The FTC's chairman, Andrew Ferguson, was at the Supreme Court today watching the oral arguments, and he says he supports the government's position that the president should be able to fire bureaucrats at will. And I asked Ferguson, if the government wins, doesn't that mean that the next president, or even this president, President Trump, could fire him? Ferguson said yes. Listen here.
Yes, in order to ensure that there is, as James Madison said back in 1789, that there's a direct chain of accountability from the lowest officers of our government back to the people, I have to be subject to the president's removal. So yes, President Trump has the power to remove me.
So, Liz, here's the backstory on this case. By law, FTC commissioners serve 7-year terms and can only be removed for cause for things like inefficiency, neglect of duty, or malfeasance. But former Commissioner Rebecca Slaughter, a Democrat who was first appointed by President Trump, she says Trump fired her this spring without any legally valid reason. So she sued, and she won in the lower courts. Those courts leaned heavily on a 1935 Supreme Court precedent called Humphrey's Executor, which says presidents can't fire independent commissioners at will. Well, now the Trump administration argues that precedent is outdated, it should not apply. And today, conservative justices seem to be open to that argument, while on the other hand, liberal justices warned about giving any president absolute power over independent regulators. So to be clear, the stakes here are huge. A win for the Trump administration would expand presidential control over agencies far beyond the FTC. And of course, we are watching in the background the Federal Reserve. There's a case coming up involving Lisa Cook and President Trump's attempt to remove her from the Federal Reserve. Arguments there a bit distinct, but still nonetheless, we're tracking both these cases involving the FTC and the Federal Reserve. A decision in this case with Rebecca Slaughter expected next year. Liz.
Lydia, thank you very much.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. It's actually a very simple issue. We have 3 branches of government, not 4. There's no such thing as the independent bureaucracy. That was never in the U.S. Constitution. It's not the intent of the founders, by the way. They never wanted some type of deep state to essentially be running the country. And so hopefully you can understand the importance of this issue, right? Can the bureaucracy actually be touched, or are they really just the people who are in charge of the United States? Well, of course, again, as I'm going to argue, it doesn't make sense if these agencies legally exist under the executive branch that the boss of the executive cannot regulate them. And sure, it's also true that they were created by acts of Congress. Congress does appropriate the funding. But when it comes, yes, to staffing and personnel, the president does have that authority. For example, Congress are not the ones who decide who the president's advisors can be, right? Or who the Secretary of State, Secretary of Education, etc. Those are chosen by the president. Now, sure, the Senate does vote to confirm them as they do with the FTC, but that's the president's choice. Ultimately, what is he deciding, right? Who do I want to staff my part of the government? It's no different than the president going to Congress and saying, hey, this person has to be your communications director. This person has to be your intern. This person has to work on Capitol Hill. No, that's Congress's authority, right? You understand what I'm saying? So it was never the case that we were supposed to have this sprawling bureaucracy that's unaccountable to anyone. And of course, the Supreme Court now may be poised to make a pretty monumental decision. But that said, I do want you to now take a listen here to the counter argument of Ketanji Brown Jackson, who, yes, as this post describes, basically did go on a no kings rant. And this is her grand justification as to why President Trump shouldn't be allowed to fire this person. And it really does boil down, again, as it always does, to judicial activism. Essentially, I feel like things shouldn't be this way. I don't like it. Therefore, it should be the law, which is, of course, not the job of the judge. That's the job of a legislator. But still, okay, take a listen.
Some issues, some matters, some areas should be handled in this way by nonpartisan experts. That Congress is saying that expertise matters with respect to aspects of the economy and transportation and the various independent agencies that we have. So having a president come in and fire all the scientists and the doctors and the economists and the PhDs and replacing them with loyalists and people who don't know anything is actually not in the best interest of the citizens of the United States. These issues should not be in presidential control. So can you speak to me?
Okay, I'm already going to stop you right there. Notice the language here, right? Should be. It's not in the best interest of the people of the United States. This, I would like to point out, by the way, is generally actually like typical liberal legal philosophy, right? We call it judicial activism for a reason, because look at Roe v. Wade, look at Obergefell, many other cases where the court basically pulls out things from the Constitution that don't really exist. But what they're really trying to say, what they're trying to communicate is, well, we feel a certain way. We feel like, oh, society needs to move in this direction or past laws are outdated. But again, I say, your job as a judge, okay? Right? Your job is not to make the laws or decide what you think they should be. And by the way, if the judiciary has that power, that's a severe form of tyranny, because the people can keep electing lawmakers to do a certain thing and the judge just says no. Hey, sound familiar, by the way? Sound very similar to an election we just had and what you're seeing from the judiciary now? Yeah, I'm just going to point that out. Again, like, this is the legal backing that judges usually use, the liberal ones do. But, of course, we know that's not the case. Anyways, keep listening here.
About the danger of allowing in these various areas the president to actually control the Transportation Board and potentially the Federal Reserve and all these other independent agencies. In these particular areas, we would like to have independence. We don't want the president controlling.
We would like to have. we would like to have. Yes. Okay.
I guess what I don't understand from your overarching argument is why that determination of Congress, which makes perfect sense given its duty to protect the people of the United States, why that is subjugated to a concern about the president not being able to control everything. I mean, I appreciate there's a conflict between the two, but one would think under our constitutional design, given the history of the monarchy and the concerns that the framers had about a president controlling everything, that in the clash between those two, Congress's view that we should be able to have independence with respect to certain issues should take precedence.
Yeah, like I said, she literally went on the No Kings rant. You cannot make that up. But I'd like to point out to Ketanji Brown Jackson, Congress still has its power. They have the power of the purse. They can choose to fund or not fund an agency. When it comes to these appointments, they still have to approve who the president wants to replace that person. So that's all still there. The argument is simply, should the president have any power over this? Or is it all kind of to a limited degree Congress, but really just this independent rogue bureaucracy that, again, is extra constitutional? It's apparently not accountable to anyone. And is that who apparently you think the control of this country should go to? How is that democracy, by the way? Well, obviously it's not. It's very anti-democratic to have judges and bureaucrats who neither of which won a single election to be running the country. But of course, we know that's what Democrats really mean when they scream about bureaucracy. But that said, today, Justice Kavanaugh did have a pretty heated response to the arguments of Jackson on this issue that, again, do seem to indicate that the court is going to be making a ruling in Trump's favor here. Okay, take a listen.
I don't understand why it is that the thought that the president gets to control everything can outweigh Congress's clear authority and duty to protect the people in this way.
But Justice Kavanaugh asked, what happens when a president can't effectively carry out his or her agenda because of what a previous administration from an opposing party has done in maybe setting up one of these multi-member agencies or boards, and those members can't be fired by the president?
I want to give you a chance to deal with the hard hypothetical. When both houses of Congress and president are controlled by the same party, them creating a lot of these independent agencies with or extending some of the current independent agencies into these kinds of situations so as to thwart future presidents of the opposite party.
So to rule for the president, they'd have to overturn a 90-year-old precedent, which is basically been on life support, if we're being honest. But the court's going to consider some of these same questions again. Slightly different framework in January when it wades into whether the president can dismiss a Fed governor. The court has indicated that it sees the Fed as a unique institution because it is quasi-private.
And agencies are not accountable to the people. They're not elected, as Congress and the president are, and are exercising massive power over individual liberty and billion-dollar industries, whether it's the FCC or the FTC or whatever.
Thoughts on Kavanaugh's words, Jonathan?
Well, both Kavanaugh and Alito really made short work of those defending this law. They kept on presenting hypotheticals, what they called hard hypotheticals, of where does this take you? Both of them said, well, can you just go ahead and make any cabinet department an independent commission? Can you specify just one commissioner? Can you make their length in office 20 years? All of those questions left the other side floundering. The best that they could say at points was, well, if something like that happens, you could come back and look at it. Well, the justices are looking at it now. And one of the things that should be unnerving is that those justices that normally form an alliance in these cases with the left of the court were not there today. Chief Justice Roberts really stomped on Humphrey's estate and said that it was basically a desiccated or dried up precedent. Justice Barrett said these commissions don't look anything like what existed at the time of some of these earlier cases. So that's not a good omen if you want Humphrey's estate to live to 91.
Yeah, well, again, folks, it really is this simple. Imagine having government bureaucrats that are not accountable to anyone. They're not accountable to their own boss, first of all, which is the president. And just imagine that, right? Being in a workplace where your boss can't hold you accountable for anything. But then secondly, not really to the people or anything else either, right? Because the judges do bring up a good point. Well, if people elect the president and say that's who we want being in charge of the executive branch, then how is it that the president doesn't have control over their own executive branch? And yes, it is a great point, right? Imagine if the outgoing Biden administration just decided, oh, well, I don't like Trump, so I'm going to create this random independent commission that basically controls the entire government, and I'm going to make their terms all 20 years. It's kind of hard, by the way, to make that whole no kings argument when you're literally arguing here that these government bureaucrats should indeed be kings. Just saying, right? And as they further pointed out, yeah, it does seem that basically all of the conservative justices in this case are pretty aligned. We don't seem likely to see any flips where, Roberts or Amy Coney Barrett or other people do change their mind. I do lastly here want to show you the argument that Justice Gorsuch did have on the federal bureaucratic state. So take a listen to that as well.
I just want to explore just for a brief minute, I hope, your scintilla of conclusive and preclusive power theory. You agree, I assume, the president is vested with all the executive power.
Yes.
You agree that he has a duty to faithfully execute all the laws.
Yes.
Civil and criminal.
We agree that the Constitution imposes on the president a duty to faithfully execute the laws.
All
Absolutely.
the laws.
Well,
some laws he doesn't have to? That'd be news to our friends across the street.
The take care clause is a duty, and it is also a power, but the text of the clause does not provide that the president must have at-will presidential...
I didn't ask that. This is, does he have a duty to faithfully execute all the laws?
We know from...
Yes or no?
I would say no in the sense...
No.
In the sense that, let me... There's two different questions, and I want to make sure that I'm answering the question.
The question is, does the president have a duty to faithfully execute all the laws? The answer is no. Why?
So he can't break the law for sure. For sure. Does he have to be vested with statutory authority to actually directly enforce, or to exercise?
I'm not asking whether he has to bring the indictment. I'm asking whether he has a duty to faithfully execute the laws.
I think the president does not, under both history and tradition, have to have plenary power of supervision. But in the case of the FTC, he does have some power of supervision, including if there's a demonstrable, palpable violation of law, the president could absolutely fire a commissioner of the FTC under the plain language of the statute.
So the answer is no, I guess. But you say that he has to have direct supervision and removal authority for someone who has conclusive and exclusive authority to bring criminal prosecutions, right?
That is our understanding of this court's decision in Trump v. United States.
Yes. That's your understanding?
Yes.
But not civil?
That's right. And to go back to earlier...
And then just to be clear, so that means if the government wants to bring a misdemeanor, that person has to be reportable to the president. But if the government wants to bring ruinous fines and penalties and injunctions, that person doesn't.
I don't know the scope of this court's holding in Trump v. United States.
I'm asking you for your theory, because it's a very interesting theory. You're building off of two words from Trump versus United States and putting a gloss on it that I'm not familiar with. I'd understood the executive power, and he has conclusive and preclusive authority of that. But this line, I don't know where it comes from. And I'm wondering, I'll be honest, I'll put my cards on the table. Maybe it's a recognition that Humphrey's executor was poorly reasoned, and that there is no such thing in our constitutional order as a fourth branch of government that's quasi-judicial and quasi-legislative. And maybe you're trying to backfill it with a better new theory that itself recognizes that we've got a problem.
Yep, exactly as we've been saying, right? And as you heard there, Gorsuch does seem poised to overturn the old ruling that said the opposite, which, happened back during the FDR years, and it certainly has had a lot of impact on the way our government bureaucracy has functioned for about a century, but now that's about to change. And that's certainly good news, because again, I'm going to go back to the central point. If it's true that the president, for example, can appoint his cabinet positions, right? Choose who he wants there. Yes, it has to be confirmed by the Senate. There's oversight of it, but ultimately that's the president's choice. Say they can anoint who they want to be the Secretary of Education. Then when I thought back to the original Doge efforts, this is what I was saying at the time. So if they can choose the top of the agency, because again, why is that? The agency is part of the executive branch, right? The president can't choose who some congressman's chief of staff is, because that's not in his purview. They can't choose who a county clerk or something, I guess not a county clerk, but like a clerk or some type of staffer is at a federal court, But they can choose their own agency, just as the other branches of government can choose their own, like, people, right? Then it's ridiculous to say that you can't fire a government bureaucrat as the president if that bureaucrat works under the executive branch, you know? Again, Congress still has their oversight because they get to vote on the new appointee, but it's still a person chosen by the president, you know? But ultimately, we've created this situation, and interestingly, it's only being weaponized against Trump. I really wonder why by the system, where suddenly the president should have no power, right? All the power in the executive branch doesn't go to the person actually in charge of it. No, it goes to these independent agencies. It's just so ridiculous. But that said, some good news looking like, and Ketanji Brown Jackson, as usual, throwing a completely amazing fit over it, and just showing just how utterly qualified she definitely is for the position, right? I feel like it shouldn't be that way. Yeah, okay. All right, that said, let me know your thoughts. Be sure to leave a like on this video, guys. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. And until next time, God bless and peace.